Paranormal Karen, she's so spooky. Paranormal Karen, funny too. Paranormal Karen, she's so spooky. Oh, and did I mention she's funny too? Yeah, cha-cha-cha.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. I'm very excited today. Let me tell you something about my guest. Everyone likes Michelle Belanger. I'm just going to say that right out. In a weird kind of quirky business, everyone loves Michelle. I want you to take the rest of the day off and just go through her website. It has everything. You're going to be watching videos and listening to fabulous music. You may remember her from Paranormal State, her many TV appearances, My Haunted Life, seen her on the news, Coast to Coast AM. She is not just she's everything. You need to go to her website and listen to her beautiful voice on her music, on her CD, and also check out her books. She has a fiction series, The Shadow Side, and also one of my favorite books, Ghost Hunter Survival Guide, which I think I bought 5 copies of because if I like a book, 5 of my friends get that book. Ryan Buel described her best. He said she is a walking, talking encyclopedia of the occult. So I have hopefully narrowed this down to the 4 topics I would love to cover with her. Psychic vampirism, the Psychic Aptitude Cards, which I have in my hands right now, soul collectors and fairies. Let's see if we can do it. Hello, Michelle.
Hello. How are you doing tonight?
Really good. I have so much that I would love to ask, but I want to start. I want to start with you. Your book is called, let's see, I have it written here, Psychic Vampire Codex. Is that right?
Codex.
Codex.
But yeah, and Codex is really just a sort of style of writing it is, where it's a whole bunch of little chapters that all kind of go together to tell a bigger story. And so it was my first major publication, and there were a number of reasons why I chose that one to be the first one. So while I am a psychic, and don't everybody grab the garlic and crosses, I'm a psychic vampire, and that is less weird than it probably sounds with the term. We just don't have a better word in the English language for someone who has the capacity to take energy as well as give it.
Right.
So it sounds spookier than it is, and that book was a lot about. The whole goal was to explain it and to demystify it, and to reach out to people who are like me, who might have been struggling with that label or struggling with any kind of understanding of what their abilities were like, and give them kind of some, not necessarily a handbook so much as guideposts to figure out what their own path is going to be.
Now, do you think most people that are, probably the weird thing is when people don't know or don't understand?
Yeah, well, actually, the vast majority of people who are psychic vampires are not aware of it. There are a lot of unconscious folks, and they're the ones that the psychic self-defense texts end up being written about. They usually come in one of 2 types. There's the ones who tend to get what they need by being really aggressive and domineering. We'll almost always encounter at least one of these in our lifetime in an office setting. That one person who pushes everybody's buttons and always finds a way to get them into an argument. And, you feel wrecked after that argument, not just because of the emotional labor that went into it, but because it feels like that person is somehow feeding off of the conflict.
Okay.
And they are, but they don't necessarily realize that they are. The other type, go ahead.
Oh, I was just actually nodding my head, and I didn't want to interrupt you because everyone out there listening right now knows that person. And I'm so thinking, yeah. I have met you before and you are so not that person. So go ahead and continue.
Yeah. The other one are what I kindly refer to as the old Aunt Ednas. They're vampiric. They tend to be people who are either shut in or they don't get out a whole lot. They may have chronic health issues. And they're very well-meaning, but they will get you into a conversation, and you will never get out of that conversation for the next 5 hours.
Yeah,
you will hear every possible thing that's gone wrong with them, And as you're sitting there on the couch or the easy chair or even the other end of the phone, you just can feel yourself like wilting with each bit of conversation that goes on. And like, it's really hard to tear yourself away because there's nothing overtly wrong with what they're saying. You want to give them sympathy, but it's terribly exhausting. Like, it really feels like it's putting you through the ringer too. And they're taking your energy as well. I mean, the thing that's important to understand is everybody gives and takes energy. It's a fundamental thing. If you believe in energetic abilities or energetic healing, Reiki, Qigong, anything like that, like that's a fundamental thing of just being human. Every breath we take, every conversation we have, every profound interaction we have with another person, there's both give and take. And the thing that makes someone a psychic vampire is, for whatever reason, and the community, and there's a large community of self-identified vampires around the world, for whatever reason, we end up needing a little bit more than we give. Becoming conscious of it, that we're doing it, allows us to make choices about either not being that guy at the office or not being old Aunt Edna who just can't let anyone escape the great black hole that is her life.
Right. There's been a real, the more people I've talked to, there's been a real sort of theme coming through. Whereas you talk about health, I know a lot of people that are actresses or actors that aren't in touch with their mediumship skills, i.e. they're not in touch with their energy and they are getting sick. But you used to get ill, didn't you?
Yeah, no, I was chronically ill. I was born with a ventricular septal defect, which was a congenital defect to my heart. So I had a number of early surgeries, and I was a pretty sickly kid. And my immune system was wrecked. Like, these were like 12-hour surgeries, and I don't know how many blood transfusions I had. I can tell you, I remember getting my immunization shots like 2 or 3 times, like, because they just swept everything out of my system. And I was a pretty precocious kid, and growing up in a family where psychic stuff wasn't necessarily that weird, it wasn't too strange to me to like get this sense of other people's energy and this sense that I could sometimes take it to make myself either get over something quicker or to feel better, to be stronger, and to be healthier. And it was a bit of a journey to really embrace the fact that was a real thing, that psychic abilities were real, that wasn't even really a question among my family, but that energy existed, that humans had the capacity not only to sense it, but also to harness it and to direct it. And in the case of someone like myself, to proactively self-heal by taking it from other people. Once I realized that what I was doing was actually real, that it had an impact on other people, there was a bit of a wake-up call to do it much more responsibly. And it doesn't always have to be a bad thing. It doesn't always have to be an attack. A lot of writing the Psychic Vampire Codex was reaching out to people like me so that they would, first of all, skip the struggling step of basically experimenting on my friends to see if this was really real, because that wasn't the most ethical thing, and it didn't win me any points in my social circle as a kid. But also give them the tools to make it productive, because taking energy from people isn't always a terrible thing. Some people have way too much, and so if you find
That was what I was going to say. How would you define, because you're right, they always write the books about how to protect, but they don't write any books for that person. How would someone benefit from having energy taken?
Well, think about somebody who's had a really rough week. They're anxious, there's a lot of tension, or they're one of those people who just cannot settle down, like they have brain hamsters that keep them awake all the time. That's someone who's got too much energy, and it's really hard for them to ground it, to center, and to pretty much like find themselves in the midst of all of that noise. So someone who can take that away, take some of it, take the edge off, pairing those two people in an energetic exchange benefits both sides. And that's a lot of what the Psychic Vampire Codex is about, is like understanding the energy dynamics between some people who have too much, some people who don't have enough, and also the flux and flow in a normal person's life, because sometimes you may not be a psychic vampire, but you may have had a serious illness that has significantly impacted your energy. And so the techniques that someone like me instinctively knows would also help you be able to bolster your immune system, bolster yourself, and heal better, recover from it better.
Wow, that sounds fabulous. Well, I do Reiki, so I understand the energy exchange. So that's very interesting. I just had this vision. I was like, have you ever been in a bar where there was like a fight and you were like, let me calm these two guys down? Like that would be a perfect situation.
Sometimes it edges on, well, first of all, I will say that I try to get consent in every case. And every once in a while, it is a good Samaritan act to have that one really fussy baby on the transatlantic flight just get sleepy enough to go and nod off and not scream.
Oh, you won everyone's heart right there.
But yeah, like sorting, or that like really particularly aggressive person who just can't stop yammering at everybody and getting in people's faces, and you just want them to like calm down a little bit.
Right.
And again, I always try to get consent, and then there are a few circumstances where it's sort of like for the greater good, can I balance the energy in this space among everyone so that this doesn't escalate into something unpleasant for all of us? Where, frequently it ends up being in planes because there's nowhere you can go once it gets messy.
Right. That's very interesting. It really should have a better word because you're right. Vampire sounds so aggressive.
Yeah. Well, I came by the word psychic vampire through the writings of Dion Fortune. She was an occultist and a psychoanalyst. She wrote her book, Psychic Self-Defense, in the 30s. And she, again, it was the best word that she had at the time. And the person that she was describing, who was basically her epiphany for this psychic ability, everything marked up, it all lined up with everything that I did and everything that I experienced, with the sole exception of this person being very predatory. So she, in many ways, Dion Fortune was inspired to delve into the topic of psychic self-defense and learn methods of shutting down her energy and shielding it, and teaching others how to shield from attacks, because this person just wrecked her for a while and seemed to be fully aware of what they were doing. I won't lie and say that like this ability is completely benign, because if you get somebody who is aggressive and who is predatory by nature, they can do some real harm. And so there is a good reason for there to be self-defense books out there. The good news is, if you run across someone like me who's not as ethical as I am, and you feel like somebody is taking your energy, chances are it's somebody that you've interacted with in the past 5 to 10 minutes. Chances are it's somebody who can still see you, like they're still in eye contact. While someone like me, and as a Reiki practitioner, you can do energy work over a distance, but it takes a slightly different brain space to do that, and it takes a little bit of training to like really do it well. And your average person who's a predatory psychic vampire doesn't want to put in the time or the energy for that, especially not when it's like a casual interaction. So chances are there's somebody who can see you, and if you remove yourself either from their direct presence or from the room, you can break the contact enough to get your energy back under control, and then set up some shields and protections to keep them out thereafter. And if that doesn't work, my favorite technique to suggest to people is to, focus on your energy tasting terrible, or focus on a terrible sound. Pretty much just spike the punch and give them a mouthful of something that they don't want, and they'll move on.
Oh, that's fabulous. I think I think a lot of people would like that information, and not just for psychic vampires, but I really think some sort of change in the universe now. Empaths, or people that are not sure if they're empathic, are really having trouble balancing their energy lately.
It's interesting because my mom was an empath, and I've worked with enough people like myself to suspect that the two abilities are two sides to a very similar, two sides to a coin. I've known a number of other psychic vampires where at least one parent was empathic. And certainly there's a lot of there's a lot of emotional content that we pick up with the energy that we take in. And when I have lectured, there's always at least one empathic person who's in the audience who's like, oh my goodness, am I a psychic vampire? And, they describe what their abilities are. And the distinguishing factor is, for most empaths, having that much energy, being overwhelmed by other people, being overwhelmed by emotion, that is detrimental. After a while, you feel wrecked. It's just too much. Whereas a vampire is energized by it, like by nature. As much as I'm an introvert, like I get a lot out of being in crowds. The difference for an empath is like they are I think of an empath as a finely tuned string on a violin. That string that will vibrate in sympathy with another struck note. So they're not necessarily taking it in; they're resonating to it. But a lot of the same techniques for protecting yourself apply.
Interesting. And I knew this was going to happen because already I'm in a weird offshoot from the topic. But speaking of energy and this kind of thing, do you believe that people can curse other people?
Yes. I think it's less common than most people believe it to be. It takes a lot of work and a lot of spite, to be honest. And I think it probably depends on what we mean by curse. There are a number of metaphysical traditions and occult traditions where there's basically cookbooks, magical spells that tell you the step-by-step way of sending bad energy or dark energy to someone. It would also depend on okay. Actually, let me step back from that and say there are. Well, yeah, it's a big and thorny topic because we say curse, and I'm going to assume that what we mean is sending something negative to another person,
right?
And that opens up a door. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. People come to me all the time and they think they're cursed when it's most of the time it's them not taking responsibility for something.
This is true. So on one hand, I won't rule out the fact that yes, it's possible to send something negative to a person, to send a spirit after them, to give them an attachment. It is not common. It is incredibly rare. It takes a ridiculous amount of energy and focus and training. And quite frankly, most people don't want to put that much work into something. Only rarely will people interact with one another and have such an incredibly negative interaction that one of them would ever be inspired to put that much effort toward harming another person.
Right.
I mean, we can't rule it out. The world is full of terrible people. But more often than not, if your energy seems like start at home first. Look to yourself first is my best recommendation to people who think that they're cursed.
Yeah, I've had some, and it is an interesting topic, and it shoots off into so many different things. In that, when I read tarot cards during the day, I've had people come over where something was following them, but that's not necessarily a curse. That could be, any things. But yeah, I thought with that exchange, I could listen to you talk about vampirism all day. That's really, I think what you're talking about is so helpful to so many people.
Well, we don't really pay as much attention as we should to our energy. And this would go toward the people who might be worried that they're cursed as well. If we don't, good energetic hygiene is important to psychic self-defense as well as emotional and mental well-being. And what I mean by good energetic hygiene is, first of all, being aware that we exchange energy with everything around us, people, places, and some of those exchanges come with yucky stuff attached to it. You go into a house that hasn't been cleaned, or there've been terrible arguments. Somebody, has been slowly wasting away in the back, or, has like clinical depression. They've never left a back room. And all of that builds up as layers of emotion, and just energetic ick in the space. And without knowing how or when to clear our own energy, many of us just pick it up and add it, kind of slap it on. And, we're walking around covered in yuck without completely realizing it. And so it's easy to mistake just brushing up against something bad for being targeted by that thing, where it's actually a passive effect rather than something actively trying to damage us.
Right. You wrote the book Dictionary of Demons.
I did.
That's the next book that's on my way. I swear to God, I got lost in your website for like 3 hours the other night. I was like fascinated. That's the next one on the way. Now, is that from, do you get all your knowledge from like some of it is psychically, or through years of study? Where do you gather everything when you get together a book like that?
Well, for the Dictionary of Demons specifically, I've got a degree in comparative religious studies, and I went to a nice Jesuit Catholic college, and I'm one of the few folks in the paranormal community who I took an academic course on demons and demonology. So my goal with the Dictionary of Demons was to have it be as academic a text as possible, while also making all of that academia accessible to a regular reader. One of my purposes, I did not want to tell people what to believe or what not to believe. I just wanted to present the beliefs as they existed. So I focused on documents, magical books, ceremonial books, religious texts, obviously biblical stuff, some things from Sumer and Babylon, but the majority of the names were drawn from texts called grimoires. They were basically magical books that were in use between, roughly speaking, the 13th to the 17th century, predominantly in Western Christian Europe. Now, there were Jewish texts that dealt with stuff like this. There were Eastern European texts that dealt with this, but I can read Latin, French, Italian, and a smattering of Spanish. So I focused on Western Europe because I was able to read the primary materials. And when I couldn't muddle my way through like the German, I was able to kind of like farm that out and get stuff back from a friend. So it took all of the things that were identified in those texts as either an evil spirit, a fallen angel, or explicitly named a demon. And I presented for the readers what these texts said about them, and then cross-referenced and added any kind of like biblical information if they were names that we might recognize, like Lucifer or Lilith, or any of the bigger ones that, you say the name and everybody either thinks that you're referring to something from heavy metal or is afraid that the very utterance of that name is going to summon it.
Right. What do you think a jinn is? Is a jinn a different category?
They are and they are not. It is fascinating to, okay, so jinn and a certain type of fallen angel, well, fallen isn't the right word. Jinn go back to the Solomonic tradition. So King Solomon is a recognizable figure in Jewish, Christian, as well as Muslim tradition. Solomon is a figure in Muslim tradition who was able to control various spirits. And for Muslims, some of those spirits are jinn. Jinn are beings that, by the mythology, they are not quite human, but they are also, they are things that reproduce and marry, and they are elemental in many ways. But if you traced the core of many of their stories, many of their myths, and Solomon is the key, it's why I bring him up. Jinn are to the Muslim tradition what the Watcher angels and the Nephilim are to the Christian and Jewish traditions. They have very similar roots and very similar stories. They tie back to the same, roughly the same streams, but where Christianity and Islam separated, the mythologies separated as well. And so they're called one thing in one tradition and another thing in the other. But over time, they developed into their own very unique type of spirit. So now, even though in some of the Solomonic stories, jinn could be used completely interchangeably with what in the West we would have called a daemon, they're their own thing now, which is a pretty fascinating development of mythology.
Right. And I don't think it was, I don't remember that sort of term becoming popular here in the United States until a few years ago. And I don't know if, because of the paranormal explosion or whatever, but I don't remember that for a long time. Or maybe the world is just really getting to be a smaller place with the internet. But now I seem to hear it all the time.
I think, well, some of it has to do with cultural exchange. The inevitable dissemination of ideas as cultures crisscross back and forth. Certainly, the ease of communication over the internet, but as well, war between cultures makes each culture on the side of the conflict more curious about the other. Sometimes that curiosity is motivated by bad feelings, and sometimes it's just wanting to learn a little bit more about the people that some portion of your government is aimed toward doing terrible things to.
Yeah.
And that's not just now. That's in the past. In World War II, there was a huge interest, a spike of interest. At the same time that we were interring Japanese citizens in camps, we had this whole fascination with Japanese culture. And it goes on and on and on and back. A lot of New Age stuff is based off of the chakras, yoga. All of that goes back to when Britain made India a colonized area, and the conflict there. Part of that conflict ended up being dialogue between the belief systems and among the mythologies of the two sides. So one part of, I think, the interest in jinn is simply we have a generally broader interest in all things Muslim and Middle Eastern, because those are hot topics right now. That is a whole section of the world that some folks in our section of the world didn't know a whole lot about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. And learning more about not just the religion, but like the little offshoots of the religion, paranormal beliefs, mystical beliefs.
Yeah, I know a lot of, it seems like a lot of stories. Then again, you can read anything, but it seems like a lot of stories of the soldiers that went over there, maybe brought something back or bought something there. Or I always know even people that go to Hawaii, when you sort of bring back a piece of the land, sometimes from where you came from, you can be asking for trouble.
I can vouch for Hawaii. Don't take anything from Hawaii home. Certainly nothing from the land. My partner Illyria, her mother was an astronomer, and she did a fair amount of work with. And they ended up in Hawaii just to do a bunch of stuff with a solstice. I think it was the '96 solstice, and they came back with all sorts of interesting stories about just the spirits of the land. It's a place that you should respect, and to take something away from it when it does not belong to you and you are not of it is a great insult to the powers there. And Illyria and her mom definitely believed that there was something there that was essential to that space. And I think it's not the only powerful land-based location in the world.
Yeah, I think there's probably more as the world gets smaller and we travel all over. That's true. I know I had some friends that went, they got invited by a paranormal group out there to go investigating, and they were somewhere. It was pretty intense, and it sounded like a whole different experience. At one point, my friend Dee said there was a guy who was saying, "Don't look up. You don't want to see what's ahead of you." And somebody got pushed, and it was quite intense. So I do think those islands have their own system, you could say. But it was almost like it was so intense. I was almost like, I'm not sure I would want to do that.
Yeah, I mean, to go back to jinn, It's interesting to me because, like you, I only started hearing about them broadly in paranormal circles in the past, I don't know, 5 to 8 years. And it did seem to be a little bit of a, I don't know, a hot topic of buzz, sort of like black-eyed children or Slender Man, which for the number of people that I heard telling me stories that sounded like Slender Man, and I'm like, they were completely ignorant to the entity's origin as a story, as an urban legend, an intentionally constructed urban legend. And it's fascinating. I think it's got a lot to do with how fast information travels and how easily it travels now with the internet.
Do you mean, like, I don't know much about, I always figured Slender Man was probably a weird incarnation of a shadow person, if it was true, or the black-eyed children. Those are the two that they really were urban legends, right?
Yeah, well, Slender Man, so Slender Man is a creepypasta, which is a really weird sounding word for somebody wrote him, somebody created him. He was intentionally written to be a scary story to tell in the dark. And as an internet, think of him as a meme monster. He was created. He's in many ways just a story and a legend. And that legend took off so completely on the internet that many people heard about him without having any idea where the origin was, what website he started on. And stories started to disseminate to the point where some people would see what we might have otherwise called a shadow person, tall, dark, shadowy thing, long, spindly limbs. And because they've got this convenient box to put that in now and call it Slender Man, it became conflated with real events, with real experiences. In a lot of ways, the very essence of what they were doing with creepypastas like Slenderman was to try to blur those lines between the fiction, some created thing, and something that could become real, something that could carry objective weight in the human psyche.
Interesting. And black-eyed children the same, huh?
I think so. I think so. I don't know what site they might have started at, but I will say that it was only until 20 years ago, I'd never heard of anything like that. But I will say that scleric lenses and blacking out eyes on television shows and in movies has an incredibly creepy effect. Mm-hmm. And it's an effect that became really popular. And it was very much a regular CGI thing to see in horror movies. And I think it's another example of the reciprocal nature of pop culture and storytelling impacting actual experiences. Think back to Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. The number of haunted hotels that I have gone to and investigated or heard somebody tell me the stories about, almost always somebody is telling me that there are little girls. There's somebody who's riding a tricycle up and down a hallway. And in a lot of ways, I don't think those people are consciously trying to reproduce or just, echoing what they saw in The Shining. Some of them probably haven't even seen the movie, the Kubrick version of The Shining anymore at this point. But the images lodge themselves into the collective imagination. Mm. And so, for better or for worse, they gave some of us an image language to translate experiences or to help create experiences. I don't think I'm doing a great job of explaining.
No, I think you're doing a fabulous job of explaining. I have sort of a joke in my act about that. I work at night as a comedian, but everyone's got the woman in the wedding dress is everywhere. That's the haunting. If she's not in a wedding dress, she's trying to buy a wedding dress. It's always like that. And I think you're right. I think that's almost, you wonder if that's collective consciousness more so than that's exactly what I saw, or matrixing of something that was just sort of nondescript.
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of things that end up being at work with it. sometimes I think those archetypal images that were handed through myth or through pop culture become very convenient masks that an entity can put on, possibly just to give a better point of reference so that they can relate to us, so that they can present something recognizable. It doesn't necessarily have to be a nefarious mask. Sometimes for us, for the perceiver, it's a convenient way of translating something that we would not otherwise have had a good point of reference to understand that experience.
Oh, interesting.
And
yeah, that makes me wonder about Zozo at the same time. Is that the same sort of cultural thing as Slender Man?
I have a different opinion on Zozo, and it has a lot to do with things that I've seen with how people work with Ouija boards. If you picture a Ouija board or spirit board in your head, and where the letters naturally begin and end, it's usually A through N and O through Z. And an effect that I have seen when people either are having a hard time getting a specific entity on the board, or if there's just a lot of energy. I've watched this thing with the planchette happen where it just sort of goes back and forth and back and forth. And because the people who are sitting on the board, and I've watched this in more than one sitting, are expecting it to be spelling something out, they're, of course, taking down the letters. And they're either doing like A to N, or they're doing, or P, but Zozo, O to Z, O to Z, Z, O, Z, O, which starts to seem like some sort of nefarious name that's coming through the board, when I think it's kind of a spirit board's version of a busy signal.
I have a friend that's he does all the fakes. He investigates all like through history. That he said the same thing. He thought the same thing, but I thought that's great analogy as a busy signal.
But to take it to the whole collective conscious idea, or the spirit archetype idea, once someone says that that's a name, that that's a spirit, that that's an entity, and that idea gets out to enough people, it becomes real enough to be applied to an experience for some people. When I was writing the Dictionary of Demons, that this was pretty obvious. A lot of the names, I mean, there's some names that are names that appear in the Bible. There are names that, have been handed down from other cultures, Sumer and Babylon and such. There are names that were just, some monk made a typo. And now there's the demon Burble Bass. But because 5 other people then read that book and thought it was authoritative, Burble Bass, and I'm totally making that name up, is now like seen to be a real thing. And give it like 5 to 10 decades, and suddenly somebody is, credibly summoning this in a circle because they read it in a book, they believe that it existed, and they put enough credit to that name that they were able to, intentionally or unintentionally, attach an entity to the name, or have an entity conveniently attach itself to Burble Bass. So some of the things that are created, it doesn't make them less real. Over time, something fills that gap.
So it makes it
whether it's our expectations creating thought forms, or something conveniently filling the shoes because it's the next best thing to what it really is.
Wow. I was up in Portland on the Shanghai tunnels there, and they were talking about I'm not a medium, a couple of mediums have been down, and they talked about there's still some souls that are stuck there. They're being kept there by a man. And the term soul collector came up, that he was a soul collector. And I couldn't find anything on that. Does that phrase sound familiar to you?
Not really, outside of maybe supernatural. And again, pop culture influencing stuff. So, I mean, what I will say is I have encountered a few entities that seem to like bullying other entities. We were at Old Licking County Jail here in Ohio, and there was I don't know if he had been one of the inmates or what, but he was an ornery customer, and of course a dead one. And there were a couple of more timid spirits that he had pretty much bullied to the point where like they were afraid to leave because he was feeding off of them.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have thought to call him a soul collector. I had a couple of bluer terms to call him, and I'm not sure what you're right into.
You can say whatever you feel.
Okay, good. I was half of my stumbling as I'm not trying to drop terrible things, but yeah, he was just an asshole.
There you go. We know now. Yeah. That's pretty. Have you ever had something follow you home, or that you were? I mean, I know you wrote the book Ghost Hunting Survival Guide. You put that on your shelf, people, right next to Witch's Shield with Chris Penczak, and you're covered. But I'm wondering, have you ever had trouble, even when you first started, when you were sort of, maybe newer at this?
The most harrowing, like, newer experience I had, I was at Gen Con, which is this big gaming convention, and I think it was Gen Con 2000. We were in the old Wisconsin hotel up there. I don't know that it was back when they had it in Milwaukee. And something in the hotel room just wrecked me. That whole, both my best friend at the time and I sensed that there was something kind of off with this hotel room, but it was a packed convention, so there wasn't any option to move, hotel room or anything. I laid down to take a nap and had like the full on being pressed down into the bed, like the whole pressure on my chest and the sense of like this man over me, this spirit, like just holding me down, and just more or less sucking the life out of me. And I was familiar enough with sleep paralysis to know that it had all the hallmarks of that, and yet it seemed much more real than just something in my brainstem malfunctioning. I woke up just wrecked, drained, and the face of this guy like really lingered. He had glasses and kind of sandy hair, and it was like I was either he was directly attacking me or I had like hooked into an attack that had happened in the room. And it was harrowing enough that it was really hard to figure out which one it was. I stumbled out because I had tried to like wake up for what felt like forever. Stumbled out, ended up going to a populated area and trying to get my head together. And finally, went down to the front desk and was like, so is this room a little haunted or anything? And, I ended up working for a hotel a few years afterwards. So I understand now the look that the person gave me, where it was she's like, I'm not allowed to say anything. And I was like, that's probably answer enough.
Yeah.
Well, and as I was walking away from her, there were a couple of plaques on the historicity of the hotel. And then this one, and I don't know why you would put a plaque up about this, but one plaque noting that Jeffrey Dahmer had worked at the hotel.
Oh, wow. That is a weird thing to be proud of.
Yeah, it was a weird thing to note, but it made the whole experience really, like, my best friend and I, he had the same thing happen to him, which is one of the ways that I will definitively say it wasn't sleep paralysis, because without comparing notes ahead of time, after the convention, we both reported having this experience of like, being held down, the same guy, the same emotions, the same feelings. And so, I had made a pact of like, if we ever were back in that area, we were just going to go to that hotel, check out in that specific room and kick its butt. Because it definitely got us when both of us were a little old enough to know something was going on, but a little too young to know how to bloody its nose for bloodying ours.
Wow. That's it. Yeah. I spend a lifetime in hotels, and I think it's very interesting because I think I have found just through survival, I think I have learned to shut off really a lot more than I used to. But that's pretty creepy story there. But now I got to change topics. I love your psychic aptitude cards.
Oh, cool. I am so happy. I've had so much fun with them.
Oh yeah, and you know what else too? Not just with other people. I sit and I use them myself in the morning. Like I use them as an exercise in the morning when I get up and I sit and I meditate. Tell me, how did you? The first thing I noticed, I got them, and I love that they are round.
So there's a number of ideas that went into these. Now, like a lot of folks, probably, I'm assuming, like I played with Zener cards when I was a kid. Those are the ones that were out of Duke University and the Rhine Institute. They're recognizable. We've seen them in movies. We've seen them in actual stuff where there's like the circle and the square and the squiggly lines and the plus sign. And I always sucked at them. Like every once in a while I was okay with them, but generally I sucked at them. Which was funny because my mom had taught me to do psychic stuff with a deck of cards. And we would first start off with red and black, and I'd tell whether or not it was red or black, and then we'd go to like, what is it, a face card or is it a number card, and then get more and more persistently, more consistently specific with it. So I started, back when I was working with Paranormal State, chewing on the idea of why did the Zener cards not work so well for me? Like I get what they were aiming for, which was as simple a symbol as possible so that there was like no chance that other random stuff was being transmitted. But the problem with psychic abilities is they're in your head. Like the human psyche, our psychological experience, our internal experience it's impossible to extricate that from psychic experience. So a person's internal monologue, their particular symbol set, all of these things, all of their associations. I see a circle and I might be thinking about a wedding ring, and somebody else sees a circle and they're thinking something completely unrelated, a crop circle. So all of that stuff, I wanted to come up with a deck that, instead of trying to rule it out, worked with that more complicated, that rich language that the mind has, both from the sender and the receiver. And then making them round, part of that was to try to immerse, if you're doing it as a pair, you're doing it with a partner, the person sending, I wanted to pull them into that image as completely as possible. Because one of the other things that I've definitely seen over time in running experiments myself or helping facilitate experiments is the person who is focusing on the cards to send the image or the word or whatever is the goal, you're sitting there staring at the same thing for 5 minutes. You're going to start thinking about like what you're trying to send for the first 10, 15 seconds, 60 seconds, however long a person is able to maintain like that much focus. And then you're going to think about a ham sandwich because you're hungry and it's near lunch. And if the person on the receiving end ends up with ham sandwich, it's not the circle or squiggly line, but it's not wrong, technically. So I wanted, first of all, rich images and in a lot of different ways to be able to read the cards and to get information from the cards. So on one hand, you can do remote viewing and do it solo or predictive, and just turn the cards over and see whether or not you are always one or two steps ahead of what the actual card is, or can you just remote view the other side of the card? Can you pick up the emotional content of the person if you're doing it partnered, and that person is looking at like blue and you've got this great expanse of an ocean that's the card. And one of the ways to try to learn how those abilities work, because it's not just about testing your abilities, it's more about understanding them. So that's why I recommend that like people sit down and go through the cards first and write down their associations for each of the colors. So the image with green, some people are going to think that that forest is peaceful, and some people may think that it's wild, and all the different words and emotions and associations that go with it should be recorded, because any of those might be what slips through to the person doing the actual reading of the deck. And knowing what things a person hones in on, whether it's just the emotion, whether it's just the word, whether it's a specific memory that is elicited deeply in the viewer of the image, all of that tells you so much about how your abilities work. Because psychic is such a messy blanket term for a whole lot of different skills.
Yeah, and the images are gorgeous. I know, and I kind of, they're so intense. And I once read something when you're doing telepathy with someone that, like, if you want to send them the image of a fish, you send like 1,000 fish. Like, it has to be that. And that was the first thing I thought when I opened these cards was these pictures are so, and not just engaging, but you know what I mean? They're so intense. They're gorgeous.
Yeah, I wanted them to be immersive. It's one reason that I asked Kat Mason to do the art. I've worked with her for a number of projects, and she's got a particularly, there's a lushness, and she's got a great eye for stuff. And she's also psychic and intuitive. She does energy body portraits, what her Catholic mom calls soul portraits. And so, she captures stuff. She captures layers to her art, even the mundane art. So even that rose that is our picture for red, there's these layers of meaning that are just kind of imprinted there in the way that you put it together.
Yeah, it's just fabulous. And we're going to have, for everybody listening, we're going to have a link. We're going to have a link to Michelle's website, but we'll also have a link to where you can buy these cards. And they are just terrific. I hope everybody goes out and gets a pack. And they're new.
Yeah, they were one of my bucket list items. We pulled them together earlier this year. It had been a long-term project, and then finding the time and the funds, and also the perfect artist, and just solidifying it. And it really came down to finding a place where I could get the cards printed in the round, and because that to me was really an important part of that immersion.
God. And I know you have been more than generous with your time. I want to ask one more question. And of course, it's probably, you're going to be like, well, Karen, I can't answer that question in 2 minutes, but I'm going to throw it out there. I have to find someone to spend a whole hour on fairies. Do you consider fairies elemental? Do you have any feeling on fairies? My story is always about a very bad fairy attachment that I had. So I sort of have and now I have a bizarre curiosity about them. Have you got a fairy story for me, or an interpretation, anything quickly?
I'll be as quick as possible. My last name is Belanger, but the other half of my family are Mahoney's, so Irish. Irish, yeah. Some things that people call fairies are elementals, and then there are things. I grew up in a small town called Hinckley, Ohio, and until I moved out of Hinckley, I did not realize that lightning bugs only come in one color. I fully believe that there are dark fae that live in the woods there, and I don't know what else to call them but dark fae. They are intelligent. They are nothing that I would call a ghost. They're not human. They're not malicious. They're just wild. They're not malevolent, I should say. They are occasionally malicious, but you have to be kind of a dick to the wild places for them to want to be a dick back to you. As long as you leave them alone, they're fine, but they will mess with stuff. And my favorite story with them was one got in the house, and I really thought I kept seeing it kind of zip around out of the corner of my eye, and it was not an insect. And then the cat started chasing it. And the poor cat also caught it, or at least cornered it. And I went to intervene because I knew that was not going to end well for anybody. The cat ended up shooting back. The cat was thrown about 3 feet backwards. The cat was not happy about this development. His tail turned into a bottle brush, and he looked like he'd been electrocuted. He ended up just being chased around the house by this semi-visible blur of I'm not sure what, for the next 2 or 3 hours, and it eventually got tired and left him alone. Cat never chased the fairy if it got in the house again, though.
Wow. Well, that's a great story. Yeah, I had someone over teaching us all how to do a quote fairy spell, unquote. So it was not it just happened. It was a little bit, yeah, I won't do that again. Was the end of that story. But Michelle, thank you so much. I'm going to give everybody the website, MichellBelanger.com. You can pick up your cards there. You want to look at all the books. Is there anything else you want to let people know or take a look at before we close up here?
If they find my YouTube channel, it's all linked up there. I have purchased a property. It's called Inspiration House. It is predictably haunted. It was built in the 1870s. The top part of it's pretty tame and sweet hauntings, but there is something in the basement. We've got some EVPs, and I'll be basically vlogging the process of working this place. It's going to be a retreat center, but we're probably going to have to deal with the weird thing in the basement first.
Oh, great. We'll hook your YouTube channel up too. Okay, great. Oh, thank you so much, Michelle. It was so nice to see you again.
Yeah, and great talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Thanks for listening to the podcast, everybody. If you need any information on me, you can find me at karenrontowski.com or paranormalkaren.com. You can go there and book a reading, or if you're enjoying the podcast, we have 3 levels of sponsorship where you can be anonymous, you can be on our gallery wall, or you can have an ad right on the show. Also, if you could leave me a 5-star review on iTunes or Google or wherever you're listening to me, that would be great. It really helps out the show a lot. Special thanks to Mike at Uno Rising Media for always putting this together. And also, everybody, you can drop me an email. Send me your ghost story to read on an episode. Or if you have any comments you want to tell me or a particular episode you like, paranormalkaren@gmail.com. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week. I'll see you next Friday. People always ask me where I get my crystals and beautiful gemstone jewelry, and I tell them I go right to GaiaSpirits.com. Gaia Spirits Gift Shop has everything from crystals to singing bowls, and they also offer readings, Reiki, gift certificates, and home blessing services that fit everyone's budget. My friend Robin Celine has years of experience with crystals, so if you're not sure what you're looking for, she is always right there to help. They even have crystal packages to help with house cleansings and getting rid of some of those pesky ghosts. I get so many compliments on my black tourmaline necklace Robin suggested for grounding, and so far I haven't floated away yet. As a special gift for my listeners, use coupon code ParanormalKaren and receive 10% off your first purchase. Again, use coupon code ParanormalKaren, all one word. GaiaSpirits.com, where I go for all my crystal and gemstone needs.